session is now open. It forms part of our examination for South Worcestershire Shared Development Plan review. And I think this is now day 8 of our hearings. We are Philip Lewis and Elaine Worthington, with the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct this examination and report to the councils in due course. I'll forego most of what I've said on other days because everyone around the table has been here on previous sessions and would have heard that, plus knows where the fire exits are and everything else. Just want to check that, make sure everyone can hear. Yeah, the acoustics are interesting here, but we'll try our best. Okay, Council, do you have anything to say before we move into the first matter? No? Okay, well, if that's the case, we'll carry on then. We've got 2 matters to talk about today, discrete topics relating to renewable low carbon energy site allocations and then provision for gypsies and travellers. We'll start with matter 11, renewable and low carbon energy site allocations. And start by inviting the councils to explain the process that underlies the site selection.
Good morning, inspectors. So the sites are selected as part of the NPPF paragraph 155B, which allows us to consider the identification of suitable areas for renewable and low carbon energy sources. As part of this, we undertook a call for sites in March or April 2020, and the site assessment process was undertaken. 64 sites were submitted, and the detailed reports are in the examination document, all 9. Following this, 9 sites were allocated at Regulation 19 stage, and this underwent a public consultation.
Okay, thank you. I was looking at the methodology for assessing the sites. I did notice under grid connection, I think in the methodology, the green and red tables are sort of superimposed. So I think it comes up with, if there is a grid connection, it's red, where perhaps it should be green. But I think it wasn't applied in that way going through. Just something I noticed this morning. It's page 49 of the document.
Is it the connection to the electricity grid should be flipped? Yeah. So the columns in that table for that entry, yes, it should be the other way around.
Yeah, because I think under, just superimposed, isn't it? But I think looking at the assessment, that was done the correct way round. It's just the wrong way around there. In terms of a grid connection, was the assessment based on just simply, is there a connection available, rather than a capacity question? The 2 are different questions. And it has a bearing on feasibility, of course.
Just on whether it would be achievable.
Thank you. And in terms of the sites that are proposed to be allocated, are the councils aware of any interest from developers in those that have been actively pursued?
It was just that they were put forward as available and deliverable for these purposes through the process, through the call for sites, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question relates to how the extent of sites was defined, and I think your statement explains all of that, so I don't have any further questions on that. We have statement of common grounds with the national landscapes. I think there's an unresolved matter with the Malvern Hills landscape, particularly in respect of one site, isn't there, the Whiting Ash Farm or whatever it is. Yeah. And they're not attending today. Maybe the councillors could explain the extent to which potential effects upon the national landscapes were considered in the site selection process.
Yes, of course. So none of the allocations themselves are within the setting of a national landscape. Two are kind of considered to be potentially within the setting. One of those is SF08, land at Whiting Ash Farm, Barrow. This is 1.1 kilometres from the edge of the national landscape. At this stage, there's not enough details known on the size, the orientation, the scale, or any screening that could be required for this. So we consider it to be more appropriate for this to be considered at the development management stage. And of course, the National Landscape Board would have opportunity through consultation to respond to that as well.
Thank you. There was some discussion yesterday about the landscape capacity report around the Malvern Hills National Landscape. Was that looked at in respect of that site?
I suspect it may have been too far for that study. It is, yeah, over a kilometre away from it.
I think it'd be useful, don't need the answer right now, but maybe that's something you can just double check and let us know if it's out with the area of the study. That would be a useful thing for us to know, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. There are various questions raised on this topic. With your permission, what I would like to do is read a very short text covering the questions sort of in the round, as it were. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I would just like to flag up that CPRE commissions reports from independent third-party specialist organisations such as UCL Energy Institute. For example, these two reports reference the installation and operation of solar panels. It's net zero emission energy scenarios and land usage, and international policies for making rooftop solar revolution a reality. The latter has determined that there is potential for up to 117 gigawatts of solar energy that could be generated from rooftops across England, which is more than the government's target for 70 gigawatts of solar energy by 2035. There are copious references made to other countries that are progressing the rooftop approach, which saves land for growing food, if you like, ensuring food security, and preserving the environment. SWDPR 59 lists various factors likely to influence the impact of solar farms can have on the landscape, including distance, size, I think the terminology is extent, topography, and the character of the landscape itself, and of course the cumulative impact of multiple sites. The two sites in Table 10 most likely to impact on the characteristics of the AONB are the Whiting Ash Farm site near Barrow, which, as mentioned, is 1 kilometre from the Malvern Hills National Landscape, and also the Pendock site, which is 2.2 kilometres from the Malvern Hills National Landscape. They're both in close proximity to each other at the southern end of the Malvern Hills Ridge. So normally they're the same distances we were discussing yesterday, as you mentioned, for in terms of factory units going into the semi-urban area of Blackmore Park, i.e. new buildings in an already semi-built landscape. Here we're talking about solar farms, i.e. large-scale man-made structures going into the largely flat natural countryside of the Severn Basin, a significant visual contrast. Furthermore, solar panels tend to be the south-facing and therefore produce glint and glare to the east and west of the panels. It is notable that these sites lie to the east of Malvern Hills National Landscape, the AONB, and therefore highly likely to give rise to glint and glare issues for walkers on the Malvern Hills, for example. In addition to the usual caveats, has previously developed land, brownfield sites, etc., been considered, and has consideration also been given to alternative locations such as rooftops and using microgeneration as an alternative route to meeting government targets, with the added benefit that it provides energy at the point of use rather than requiring connections to remote power lines and the attendant substations required. Has consideration been given to the visual impact of the proposed power stations, because that's what we're discussing when we discuss solar farms, by using, for example, computer-generated montages to simulate the appearance of the proposed solar farms at these sensitive locations. Has consideration been given to modelling the inevitable glint and glare associated with these sites when viewed from the Malvern Hills, etc. Regarding the extent of each of the proposed allocations, has consideration been given to encouraging developers to use the latest commercially available solar panels, which have a substantially higher yield, higher energy density in a sense, thereby effectively halving the number of panels required to achieve a given output, and thereby substantially reducing the extent, scale, size, whatever your terminology, of the proposed sites. May I also endorse the Malvern Hills National Landscape suggestion that size descriptors, small, medium, large, for solar farms, i.e. power stations, are located within or close to the AONBs, are revised downwards. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Look to the council for response to any of those points.
Yes, of course. So in terms of the use of previously developed land, none were submitted as part of the call for site stage. We wouldn't exclude them. It's just that it's rare that they come forward for the purposes of renewable energy generation. In terms of the microenergy, we also have policy SWDPR 33 proposed, which allows for renewable energy generation at micro level in new developments. And of course, this isn't a restricted policy. If windfall allocations came forward, those would be assessed on their own merits as well. So we would support previously developed land that came forward as renewable energy. In terms of glint and glare, again, that depends on orientation, scale, height, and massing. we would require applications to submit a landscape and visual impact on application. And also the plan is to be read as a whole, so we have policies in the plan to protect on landscape and the national landscapes as well.
Thank you. I have to say I'm struggling with the acoustics within this room. I presume there will be scope for some dialogue offline, as it were. That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, the recordings are crystal clear. They work really well, but the acoustics of this room are really interesting. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
I don't have the best hearing, but I think I'd probably sit in the optimum place. I think what the councillors were saying is referring to the various other policies in the plan that would address some of the points you've raised in supporting micro energy, renewable energy provision, policies about safeguarding national landscape interests, etc. So I think really that's the plan deals with these things, and this is a policy dealing with some allocations, but there are a number of other policies that would be taken into account should applications be made for these sites and other sites. That's right, isn't it?
So that's absolutely correct. And you know, we've looked at the impact on AONB as part of the assessment of the sites. But as my colleague has just said, it's the specific mitigations of a proposal. Then there's clear protections in the policy in terms of some of the issues you were raising about glare, impact of these developments from the national landscape. So you know, the policies are drafted in a way that will ensure that that is taken account if these sites are supported through the DM stage when we look at the planning application.
Thank you. Okay, I mean, we've got the written statements and the representations in respect of the national landscape interest, and we'll consider those. There are also some main modifications suggested to the policy. There's, I think, amending A1B to national landscape, but some others as well. So.
Yes, that's correct. And we have also proposed to add to the reason justification a reference to site SF06 requiring a site-specific HRA to assess any impact on functionally linked land.
Yeah, and that picks up the point in our question in relation to the Severn Estuary Special Protection Area, because Natural England, and it's in the Statement of Common Ground, have referred to functionally linked land, which is land used by the species that are listed as part of the designation of the Special Protection Area. So they leave the estuary, go and use this land, and so it's directly linked. Whilst it's not actually in the estuary itself, the birds that are listed as part of the species that form the ensemble of the SPA, spread out in the wider landscape and use certain areas, and they've been identified and they're recognised as functionally linked. So the necessary legislative requirements that apply in dealing with those. So that's, I think, going to be covered by the main modification, as you said, isn't it? Okay. Can you explain briefly how the council's taken into account significance of heritage assets in identifying these proposed allocations? Yeah, this microphone on.
So the site assessment process considered whether the development of the site would have a detrimental impact on scheduled ancient monuments, listed buildings, conservation areas, and other heritage assets. When we considered those constraints, including the impact on heritage assets, if we felt that they could be overcome without restricting development by reducing the site in size, we did that and then reassessed that smaller cut of the site. So site SF06, Queen Hill, that was reduced in size to avoid impact on the listed buildings. Again, because we don't know the specific details of these sites at this stage in terms of scale, orientation, we feel that it's best that this is dealt with through the DM stage, and we have policies in the plan in place to protect against heritage assets, as well as the national policies. Archaeological or heritage desk-based assessment should also be part of the assessment planning application process, and allocation of potential renewable and low carbon site does not imply that any application for development would necessarily be granted permission. So it would be considered on its own merits against national and local policies.
Thank you. And finally, again, how has the issue of flood risk been taken into account in defining the allocations?
So solar farms have now been added to the list of essential infrastructure for the purposes of flood risk vulnerability classification in the MPPF. The evidence base prepared include a level 1 and level 2 strategic flood risk assessment, and this was an important consideration within the site assessment process. Solar farms are generally considered to be 95% permeable, so development of a solar farm does not usually increase flood risk, and surface water runoff should not be any greater. The plan also should be read as a whole, so we have policies within the plan that deal specifically with flood risk, and no allocations are within the flood zone except for one tiny bit of site SF06, which falls partially within flood zone 2. It's unlikely that there will be any development within this part of the site by its. And the allocation of a potential site through this does not necessarily mean that any application would be granted permission.
Thank you.
Sorry, just taking up your point, you mentioned about the wider aspect of the Severn Estuary in terms of the zone, which goes much wider than the river itself. When you're looking due east from the Malvern Hills, you are actually looking at the Bredon and the Cotswold AONBs, and vice versa, of course. There is a third site, which is the Queen Hill site, which is directly between those 2 points, more or less midway, actually, between the 2 points. I think it's 6 kilometres from the Malvern Hills AONB and 7.5 kilometres from the Cotswold AONB. Is the interdistance, the intervisibility between two, in a sense, adjacent AONB sites, areas, landscapes, taken into account? I know from personal experience that there are large solar farms at Deptford and at Strensham, and certainly on Bredon, walking on Bredon one evening. So you've got the sun, into the west. The panels, as I said, are south-facing, obviously, and you do get glare from the panels at Strensham. And I wondered if the intervisibility, the sort of optics, as it were taken into account between the two nominally adjacent landscapes, valued landscapes.
Thank you. Any response from the councils?
So we considered the impacts of the sites on the national landscapes and their settings. This site at Queen Hill is quite some distance from the setting of the national landscapes, and the National Landscape Boards didn't really raise that as an issue. And again, it refers back to the DM stage, where when we know more about the size and the scale, screening, proposed mitigation, that could be considered.
Yeah, because I would expect a landscape and visual assessment to consider national landscapes, to consider landscape character, classifications, etc., and to deal with cumulative effects as well. So I think it would come through at that stage and identify the various natural landscapes, and look at sort of zones of visual influence as well.
That's correct, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I've got the points raised today. We've got the points raised in written statements that we'll reflect upon. I don't think we have anything else on this matter. You want to add anything else? No? No? Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for your contributions. Short, discrete matter, but I think we've covered everything we need to on that one. So do you want to take a brief adjournment and
Change the name
Yeah,
plates, yeah,
yeah.
briefly.
how long?
So we're moving on to matter 7, meeting the needs of travellers and travelling show people, which is covered under policy 20. I think there's a few new faces. Could we do the introductions in this instance? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam. My name is Miss Suzanne Ormsby, King's Counsel, and I represent the councils on the plan.
Ian McLeod, Director of Planning.
Hello, I'm Doug Lee. I'm the Head of Development Planning at Wychavon Council.
Dr. Kate Restrain from Triple R Consultancy.
And Dr. Alan Restrain from Triple R Consultancy.
Anna Millman, Planning Policy Manager at Worcester City Council.
James Bonner from Turley on behalf of Bellway.
Andrea Kaplan from Savills on behalf of St Modwyn in relation to the Worcestershire Parkway new settlement.
Thank you. So we'll go straight in with question 64 is, what are the implications of the introduction of the updated planning policy for travellers' sites the 12th of December 2024 for the plan's approach? So the new PPTS at paragraph 30 refers to transitional arrangements. We think that means we need to consider the policies in this plan under the previous PPTS from 2023. I think the councils are agreed, and I think participants are generally agreed on that. So I'm going to move on from there, unless anyone has anything. Okay. So question 65 is about the relationship of the plan with the emerging South Worcestershire travellers and travelling show people policies and sites allocation DPD. So the councils now seek to incorporate the allocations set out in that DPD and some additional design criteria into policy 20. There are some MMs and additional modifications suggested. Just to start with, can the council just explain for our benefit what that DPD contains, what it covers, and what progress has been made with it so far?
Thank you, Mark. So we've taken the view, obviously, to Paul's work on DPD. It would, in many ways, been duplicative of the approach we're taking now through the development plan itself. We're satisfied that obviously the allocations now are coming forwards. I mean, if we hadn't proposed allocations within the main development plan, the DPD would have picked that up. But given the detail we've been able to put into the development plan now, we've obviously got allocations in there. We've developed a criteria-based policy for the windfalls coming forward. So we're satisfied that we wouldn't need a DPD given the approach we've taken in the plan itself.
Okay, so in terms of that, how many sites or pitches and plots are there that are proposed in that DPD that would then come forward into this one?
Hello, we could probably just provide a note confirming this, but there was only 2 of the small allocations coming through, one of which was for Canada Bank, which was 2 pitches, which got planning permission in November of last year. So they weren't significant sites, there were a number of smaller sites.
I think that the table in the update to the GTAA says there are 6 overall pitches and 2 plots, I think. I don't know if things have moved on since then.
No, that was the position as of October. Since then, we have approved 5 further pitches within Wychavon, which have got planning permission.
So would they be
One of which was Canada Bank, so it's probably 3.
would they be allocation? Are they allocations that would be seeking to come across, or are they not?
The Canada Bank one is in the list. Have a quick check of the modifications.
just so that we can get an understanding of the
Yeah.
extent of what's being put to us, really.
Mm.
Evidence of DP applications, as well as allocations.
Yeah. The allocations that were coming through that were, or that are in that table, are 4 at the Paddocks in Newlands, 2 at the Hill Canada Bank, then there were 2 travelling show people sites at Kimberley's Field. That's set out in our proposed modifications at section F.
Yeah, so it's the 5 in that table.
Mm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Which does total the 6 and the 2 from
Yeah.
the GTA. Yeah.
I mean, we can add in the other planning approvals as smaller allocations if that would
Well, I
help
suppose
in terms of clarity. Sorry.
really,
that's my mind.
yeah. So really, from our point of view, the reps that were made on that DPD, which is a completely separate process to this plan, we can't take those into account and effectively push policies from one plan into another, is sort of the bottom line with it for us. So in that sense, the policy can only really do what the PPTS tells us it should do. So it can set out the need and it can set out the DM policy, and we need to talk about supply and how to deal with that. But those sites in particular would need to go through more consultation for us to be able to just incorporate them. On the DPD, did you say paused? Was that the word you used for it? Sorry, by all means, come back if.
Just thinking that these also through part of the process that the council are adopting in meeting the need is through not only allocations but also through applications and through infill. And I think that from what I'm understanding is that these fall within that as well. There's like an overlap with that, so therefore it's still within the outline as how the council are meeting the need.
So certainly we can pick those up in supply,
Yeah.
certainly, and we'll come to the table.
I think it sort of overlaps with that to some extent as well.
So the DPD is, I think you used the word pause, but is it?
I think we were going to review whether it was still needed after this process, because I think there would be no point in us taking it forward if we demonstrated that the need had been met through this plan, and then what would be the additional benefit to the DPD. So I think we would take a sort of final view on it after the hearings were concluded. Chair, we've received your reports, but our intention isn't to progress with the DPD at the moment unless we felt there was stronger reasons for us to move forward with another.
What I'm guessing, it's not been withdrawn. It hasn't gone from. So
no, we haven't withdrawn it.
So question 66, that's about minimum pitch and plot requirements. Can the council just explain what's required there with reference to the MMs and the updated, obviously we've had an updated assessment compared to what's in the actual plan?
Yeah, we reviewed the GTAA last year, partly in response to the the court's decision on the Smith case, which changed the definition. So obviously then the need went up, and we have got to the position now whereby at the latest update the need over the planned period was 167 pitches, which are for gypsy and travellers. And then on top of that, there were 16 plots, which was the requirement for the travelling show people. Maybe stressing beyond the question, but in terms of the GTAA update, it looked at both, the definitions it was at that time within the planning policy for travellers' sites, but also it also looked at a sort of ethnic definition, which is probably closer to the recent changes introduced by the Secretary of State to the policy. So we are aware of both of those scenarios, but at the moment we're obviously catering for the first one, but obviously if there's a need, there is obviously room to address the second as well going forward.
Thank you, that's helpful. So the next two questions really are moving on to supply. I think if we just take them together, questions 67 and 68. So what really would be helpful is if we could just talk through the different sources of supply. They're set out in table 2 of exam 28. That's the updated the updated one. So we've talked about the top layer, which is the 6 and the 2. Bearing in mind, I think some of these numbers might be different in the MMs, but if we just talk generally about those, we've talked about those. So can you just talk us through the others really? So what's expected at Worcester South and when, and at Worcester West? Now we did pick these up in matter 10. Was that only yesterday? Anyway, we did pick those up in matter 10 and we heard some, but could you just, explain that for us, please?
In terms of those two specific strategic allocations, there's a site at each, both composed of 10 pitches each. In terms of the approvals that have been granted there, to date, we've taken financial contributions towards the provision of those sites. Overall, that probably equates to £2.1 million to help deliver those sites going forward. I think it should also probably be noted that provision of those sites is towards the back of the planned period, so it's 2039 to 2041. And overall, as we probably said, we've got, I'm not sure if it's the right word, we're adopting a holistic approach, whereby we've got the allocations, both the small ones and strategic sites, and then these are coupled with a well-established track record of windfalls, which we've taken a cautious approach of 10 pitches a year, and then there was a more nuanced piece of work that Triple R did for us, which was looking at the opportunity, working with the community, looking at issues around, I suppose, intensification, whether existing sites could be expanded or used more efficiently, and also rationalisation in terms of where there were sites without planning permission. And I appreciate there's probably an overlap historically between windfalls and those categories, but that's the overall approach we were looking to take.
That's great, and I'm going to move on to the windfalls as we go. Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, they all overlap, so that's fine. So just the tension, I suppose, for us is if on those the two allocations we've just talked about, if financial contributions have been taken for the gypsy provision, is it then, well, what's the right word, effective to seek to allocate some of the plots within those allocations?
I think it's a case of sort of, taking the resource and seeking to find an appropriate site that would meet that need within the area going forward, and whether that's within the allocation itself or on a site nearby. One of the things we have looked at, and I appreciate it does bring in the double counting issue, is whether those resources could be used if needed to help deliver the proposed travelling showperson site at Rushwick, which is relatively close. But obviously you can only spend the money once as well, so you know it does trip back. I think the point about also the final column is when you look at the, I suppose, want of a better expression, over provision over time in terms of the definition, we would sort of be 26 pitches in credits at that point, and I appreciate it. That's a sort of movable piece which might change over time, but it still does give us a sort of not comfort zone is the wrong word, but there's some sort of capacity at the end to sort of you know, deal with any uncertainty around the Worcester provision going forward. I suppose the other thing about, you know, the approach of taking the Section 106 contributions is, you know, in terms of going forward, it does give us a degree of flexibility and a resource to try and address the need as pertaining to the Rushwick site, if that's where we end up.
Yeah, I suppose that's something we'll need to look at that then, because if the contributions have been taken, the policy to then seek to allocate parts of those sites for gypsies and travellers, I'm not sure how effective that policy can, in the plan, by mentioning that, can be if the contributions have already been taken. Do you see the point? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify, the inclusion of those sites within the policy is to fulfil that policy vacuum that was discussed yesterday. They are only counted the once within the supply meeting. They're not, it's not counting for S106 and that policy as well. So we're not double counting in that respect.
No, thank you. That's helpful. Yes, we hadn't identified it as a double counting issue. It's more the effectiveness of the policy as drafted. Yeah.
We just feel that having worked with the families in the area, this holistic, as Councillor said, it's the holistic approach and the flexible approach that the council are adopting, we think is very effective and quite refreshing to see, and because they are looking at it from every potential angle of meeting this need. And we've noticed the times we've been working with the families in the area and doing the assessments, there's a much improved and working relationship between the Gypsies and Travellers and Show People and the council. And from there, as the council have already represented, through their applications that have already granted and windfall that has taken place, they've proven that this does take place. And we feel more confident that it will improve going forward, because families are planning on coming forward with applications and more confident in doing so, which has been refreshing to see.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
The only thing I wanted to add on was obviously there's still land to come forward at the two urban extensions, and we noted, I believe, in the previous session when we looked at these, about putting the footnote in around that it wouldn't be effectively double counting these, that there was still land to come forward, and it could be a case of there's still opportunities. So I think, as Mr. Rudge said in his response to that, whether, for example, about some of the employment areas, if all of that land was delayed, or an application came in for Gypsy and Travellers there, that we've actually got the resource there then to actually help them deliver it within that allocation still. So I think it was more of a case of we're keeping some degree of flexibility, but it does need to be recognised that we wouldn't be expecting both. So you're completely right. You know that we've taken financial contribution. We wouldn't be expecting them to provide another 10 pitches directly themselves, but we have the ability then to deliver it. So I think that's how we tried to address it in the earlier session.
Yeah, Mr. Rudge, he did describe it as, he didn't say the words, but almost like not a fallback or a position if some of the employment land didn't come as expected, then yes, yeah. Okay. In terms of the other site though, I think that was the situation on West, but on South, I think, is there not an outline permission for the whole site? Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Ma'am. In respect of the Worcester South Urban Extension, otherwise referred to as Broom Hall, the site or the allocation has come forward through a number of different applications, but principally St Modwyn Homes, an outline application for 255 dwellings and an element of employment land, and the largest element of the South Worcester Urban Extension, Welbeck Strategic Land, which is the outline application and permission for 2,204 dwellings. So it's those permissions that have included the Section 106 agreements that have included the obligation to make developer contributions towards Gypsy and Traveller accommodation sites.
So would there be land within the second example that you've just given that may come or not come that would allow a physical site to happen, Gypsy and Traveller site to happen?
Based on the illustrative master plan and phasing plans included within that outline application, the answer is no. But Welbeck Strategic Land are currently, as you heard us advise you in an earlier session, looking to dispose of their land interest, and they're representing 14 separate landowners, so that's been quite protracted, but they are looking to dispose of the entirety of their land interest to one house builder, but with 3 separate outlets. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be future planning applications for amendments or other land disposals over what will be still be a fairly lengthy build-out process, and circumstances could change. So what we're trying to do is, for want of a better expression, make sure that we are future-proofing through this plan to deal with those sorts of opportunities that might arise. Not that will arise. We can't say will, but might arise. Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful. So if we move down the table, so the next source of supply listed there is Parkway. So there's the new strategic settlement at Worcestershire Parkway, where 20 pitches and 10 plots, I think, are anticipated on that one. Yes, Savills.
So I'm so sorry to interrupt. Could you put your microphone on? Otherwise, the recording won't pick you up.
Yes. So yes. So did you catch any of?
We can hear perfectly. It's just for the recording.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. So the council's own travel assessment document, exam 22, actually states that Gypsies and Traveller households prefer semi-rural or rural locations to minimise the impact on the settled community. So it's questioned why they all been such a significant amount of traveller sites being pushed towards these urban extensions and new settlements. And we've just heard about the South Worcestershire example at Broom Hall and the sort of difficulties of actually delivering a site there. So really, it's queried why the so many sites being pushed towards the strategic sites, and just going back to the council's call for sites exercise back when the DPD was being prepared, they actually identified 152 pitches coming through sites that people were putting forward, a number of which were small extensions to existing traveller sites, which addresses a particular traveller need where they want to have a pitch next to a family member as the family grows. So it's just this does not seem as the most appropriate way for the traveller community to find their sites. And it's just a question whether the council have any evidence to demonstrate this is where traveller sites should go.
Okay, would the council like to respond on those points?
Thank you, Mom. So Worcestershire Parkway is an allocation of 1,130 hectares. So, good to be blunt, if you couldn't find a site for gypsy and travellers within such a massive allocation, where on earth else are we going to find an allocation? So it's perfectly appropriate. So Worcestershire Parkway should accommodate the needs of gypsy and travellers and travelling show people through this planned period. And there is plenty and ample opportunity within the site of that significance to accommodate that level of growth. We've taken a balanced approach to meeting the needs of gypsy and travellers and travelling show people. We've got a reliance on windfall sites, but obviously the large part of our growth is directed to the strategic allocations, and we feel that it's appropriate to look at the balance of, we've just discussed the 20 of the urban extensions, where there's obviously a debate about financial contributions. We have 30 at Parkway, 10 at Throckmorton, 10 at Rushwick, and then the need to obviously travelling show people in addition to that. But that is very much balanced. That's 50 pitches out of a requirement of 161. So it's very much a balanced approach, recognising windfalls, but with the strategic sites, which are large land areas, where certainly with detailed work, we should be able to find an appropriate location here for the travelling and gypsy community. And that will provide certainty to the community in terms of meeting their needs moving forward, as well as our approach with windfalls. So we believe our approach is entirely appropriate. And as was just reminded to me, access to service and facilities, of course, with the major allocations, the travelling community and gypsies would benefit from the new facilities within these settlements as well. So that's why we've taken the approach we have.
Sorry, it's probably maybe a detailed point on the sort of semi-rural comment, which is within the report that R did, 22A. Yes, paragraph 4.7 does reflect the desire of travellers to maybe have rural or semi-rural locations, but then that's qualified at paragraph 5.12, where it talks about the difference between need and desire, and it sort of it concludes that demand, on the other hand, is more subjective and is sometimes inferred from the broader preference for certain locations or types of sites, such as a desire for more rural or semi-rural sites, without the pressing necessity that need implies. So that it does say there's a difference between plain need and demand or desire. I suppose the other thing I would say that sort of falls behind what Mr. MacLeod said is that, the things that make the strategic allocations attractive to the settled community in terms of access to services, probably improve sustainability, employment, active travel routes and all that sort of business could equally apply to the travelling community. There's probably no difference between the desires of what people in those communities are looking for.
Sorry to put you on, is that your experience as well of working with the communities?
Yeah, I think that what the approach the council are using, including this allocation of land, addresses the different desires and needs and issues that families might have. So some families, yes, would prefer to be out rural. Some might actually need to be in a location such as this. So I think the combination of their holistic approach of addressing people's different needs, and that includes whether they're in a rural or a similar area to what this land allocation is about. And I think there are a range of households in the area, and some households have already expressed an interest in some of these areas and these lands. So families have already expressed from the Egyptian travelling and show people communities for the land. So it's already of interest. And I also think that some families do like to be more remote, and that's for a range of issues, sometimes because they don't get plan permission in more built-up areas. So there has been more of a move to more rural, and some prefer that, and some prefer to be in more built-up areas. So it's a whole spectrum of people in the area and issues of need. And as the council sort of talked about, when it comes to need, it's about having a site, it's about having a location, and it's about having permission. And sometimes families know that they have to be flexible with that. And what's more important is having somewhere, and they work the location. So they might find some land, but it doesn't meet planning criteria. But if there's land that's already met that criteria and it could be made a home for them, that's more important to them.
Did you want to come back before I move? Oh, sorry. Were you?
No, I think just in the many things we mentioned, obviously access to education obviously is important as well in terms of, access to community facilities.
Yeah, so taking that on board, we're still not quite sure what the community, what evidence there is. The community, have you been speaking to them? Is there a document that's setting all this out? But then also the location of Worcestershire Parkway and also Rushwick. It's really not that close to where existing traveller sites are, and existing traveller sites are in the Vale of Evesham for a reason, because that's where a lot of employment opportunities are for the travelling community. So it's just really what evidence the council has to demonstrate that in terms of employment as well, that Worcestershire Parkway is an appropriate location.
Yeah, Mr. Rudge. Don't mind who, but Mr. Rudge had his hand up.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Just very briefly, if I may, it does feel important to just reiterate that something that council said in an earlier session, which was that the decisions that the council's made on the outline applications for the urban extensions were made on the specifics of those applications and on their own merits. So the councils have always been very clear that that doesn't set a precedent for consideration of other strategic sites. Thank you.
Can I just add, we have been engaging with the families and through the assessment and through ongoing consultation, and families are coming forward directly, not only through us, but also directly to the council, expressing interests. And as I sort of said before, there's a combination, there's a difference between ideal and reality for these families, and people are prepared to travel, having land that meets all the different criteria, and that they can set up and develop sites and yards, etc. I think is a priority for a lot of these families. They're currently living on overcrowded pitches and plots, and I think requirement to travel for work or other things, if it's not quite in their area, won't be an issue for these families. It's more of an issue of having a location where they're not having to be overcrowded, where they're not having to double up, and where they're not wondering if or not they'll have a place. Some of them will stay probably more close to their families and develop there through the windfall and through applications. But there will be others who will be wanting the land that's identified. So because they can't find alternative land, because they can't, or if they do, it's not going to go through the planning process, through other planning criteria. So therefore, this land will meet their needs. And it's about need. We all know that maybe we all might love our homes to be in a particular place, but people have to adapt, and families, gypsies and travellers, and show people know that more than anyone.
They're flexible in their attitude towards where they live, basically. So there is a wide range of different locations they're prepared to reside, which is better than being overcrowded or unsuitable accommodation.
And the land has already been expressed an interest in.
Yeah, on the expressions of interest, is that captured anywhere, or is there any formal documents we can look at, evidence? I think that's what's been alluded to. Well, not alluded to, mentioned by Savills.
I think they have expressed interest, show people have expressed interest, but families have already said that they're open to options. So it's not specific, some of it's not necessarily specific, but they're open to options as to where, if the council have identified land that they could go to, and whether it's in a built-up area or else away. And the show people have expressed, but I don't know how it's evidenced in the sense of being able to provide.
In terms of Rushwick, there has been engagement with the family, the group, who occupy a travelling show person site on the edge of Malvern, a linear site next to the railway. And we've certainly had correspondence from an individual based there who's interested in the Rushwick site, given its proximity to the existing site. I suppose the other point about travelling show people, why we've identified one at Worcestershire Parkway, and obviously the detailed site's got to be determined through the SPD and other work, but there is at that certain points within that site, there's good proximity to the strategic highway network, which is probably more pertinent for travelling show people because of the fairground equipment and other apparatus that they might have. So.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, and that's moved us on to Rushwick as well, which is where we were going next. Unless anybody has got anything else on Worcestershire Parkway, no. Okay, so in terms of Rushwick, it was the 10 plots for the travelling show people, and we did hear some of this in matter 9, 10, 9. Yeah, and we did kind of defer on to today. So if you'd like to speak to that now, that would be helpful.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you. So just I guess to reiterate our position. So Bellway control both sides, north and south of the road. The northern site is the draft allocation for 10 travelling show people pitches. The southern site is not identified for any allocation. So we understand the difficulty and the challenges for both the council and the inspectors to consider any emission sites. But just to reiterate our position that the land to the north is not available for travelling show people if the land to the south is not put forward for residential purposes, and that's a contractual position that I think I set out during matter 9. That being said, Bellway are looking to work constructively with the council on this, and we are working up a draft statement of common ground, which if we can get to a point that's able to be shared with you, I'll let the council expand on that. But I think our position is that we are going to prepare an application for both residential on the south and for the 10 travelling show people pitches to the north.
Just to be clear, residential on both?
Yeah, but we recognise that this is a matter that's outside of the local plan that's submitted.
Forgive me for interrupting. I think the answer that you gave to the inspector was wrong. As I understood it, you were proposing an application in relation to show travelling people on north and housing on the south. Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, so it would be both sites, residential on the south, 10 pitches, travelling show people on the north as per the allocation. Recognise that this is the point on the south is an emission site, and it's not what's put in front of you right now. So there is still a risk that if the application process is not successful, the position remains unchanged that the land to the north is unavailable, including through appeal. And so I would reiterate our I would reiterate our point that we made previously that if the council and inspectors were to consider alternatives, it could support the land to the north if the land to the south was identified for housing, but appreciate that's not the discussion right now. Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful. Yeah. Yes,
thank you, Bob. So obviously, we're not obviously at this point entertaining emission sites, obviously for housing. But I think what you've heard is there's a variety of options as to how this site could potentially come forward. There's a dialogue to be had with Bellway around the combination of sites that would obviously need to come forward for a planning application, as has just been stated. That it would be a material consideration in that application if provision was made for the travel and show people site as part of that. So we have the DM process available to us. I would hope to avoid a situation where we'd have to compulsory purchase the land for the travelling show people, but you've heard equally there is funding available to the council to facilitate delivery of this type of site. I don't believe we would get to that point, but I think there's a constructive dialogue to be continued to be had with Bellway as we move this site forward and hopefully get it confirmed through this plan.
In terms of the timing of that, this one is included within the 5 years, isn't it? So how do you anticipate that sort of falling into place?
I think discussions are obviously ongoing, and there's no reasons, I think, why those discussions couldn't be concluded fairly quickly. But obviously that would be a DM matter for us to consider in terms of the benefits of this site coming forward, along with some additional housing. There's some other policy considerations we'd obviously have to take into account. But I think the intentions of the parties is to work together and move at pace on this site. And we do have expressions of interest in this site, from the community as well. It's a site which is of interest to them. We've obviously looked at the access to it, and you've got a position there from the county council that the site can be accessed. But that's, I think it's, so I think in terms of delivery, we feel there is a way that this can come forward early.
Okay, so that's another one where we'll need to be updated then and see any statement of common ground or...
We are working on that with Bellway at the moment. It's around the, obviously, as I've said at the start, we're not entertaining emission sites from this point in time. So but we'll continue to work on the wording with them and get that to you.
I suppose it's a point of detail again as well. The site, as it is currently used as a sort of Christmas tree farm. It's predominantly flat and there's an existing access off Claphill Lane. So yes, there will be work to be done to deliver a traveller's site, but it's, the ingredients are there to sort of bring that forward.
When we had the Rushwick session, we did have a discussion about whether the travel and show person site should remain part of the overall strategic development, or whether that should be a freestanding allocation. Have you had time to ponder that further? Because we've heard clearly that the promoters of the Rushwick site, but actually that's not in their, and it clearly isn't in their control, is it? It's in.
Yeah. I think the importance from our point of view is that the site is allocated. Now, you could look at it as part of the strategic allocation, or you could put it as an individual application. I think the reason why we've included it within the whole allocation is to try and look at that area holistically, and also there's then the potential for contributions towards its delivery as well. I can see the pros and cons of both. I think the critical point from our perspective, it gets allocated one way or another.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So next down the table is Throckmorton, which is the total of 10 pitches. Obviously, that we have had the session on that, and that is a different kettle of fish to the other ones. Can you just outline how, if there's any thought on how that would be likely to be achieved?
So as we talked about in the Throckmorton session, further work is obviously needed behind where we are with Parkway and Rushwick. So the intention is to do more detailed master planning work now, obviously to look at phasing and delivery. Again, there is a Gypsy's existing facility close to Throckmorton allocation as well.
It's just outside, it's on the A44.
It's just outside the red line on the A44. So we feel it's, as a location, it would work well for Gypsy and travellers. But we need there obviously to look at Throckmorton, the details of how we get that site forward in terms of phasing and delivery, and where this allocation obviously would fit into that. Again, it's a significant site. In this particular case, obviously brownfield land as well. So we feel there's plenty of opportunities to find an appropriate location for the community here.
Thank you. So the next line is the pitches granted consent, which we've sort of touched on, and I think that figure is potentially amended in the MMs already. And then the next line after that is the windfalls, which we've also touched on. So I think 10 per annum is expected or anticipated, and then there's some additional, if you want to call them windfalls, that have been looked at in the further tables in the 22A document. So that's about the regularisation and the expansion or intensification. Can you just explain those sources, please?
The 10 was we termed it a cautious approach, taken from a sort of pattern of delivery over quite a substantial period, sort of 10 years. And, over that time, we've delivered 13, 14 pitches. So 10 was felt to be a reasonable approach. As I said, on top of that, there became this sort of nuanced approach whereby we asked RRR to look at the intensification question, which could be expanding sites, as I said before, or using land more efficiently. And it should be noted that over time we do have applications where people are looking to order their site more efficiently, and maybe there's increase in sort of caravan spaces and pitches within those sort of allocations historically. And then the other part of it was regularising sort of, sites which are operational without consent. And within the report the RRR prepared, which is exam 22A, there's figures given for both those elements, which, might be ambitious, but they were based on, I guess, the engagement with the community going over, and they'd be above and beyond the picture that's presented in table 2. Although, as we said before, you could argue that some of those regularisation intensification sites might, in the fullness of time, come forward through the windfall process. But,
sort of drilling down of the windfall in some ways, isn't it? Yeah.
And with the engagement, I think, it would hopefully, deliver more pitches, but also I think it's important to regularise pitches and, have them designed and laid out and delivered in such a way that, in terms of any applications, that they meet the criteria within the policy and the modifications to the policy, which match that within national guidance. So that was the general approach. So it wasn't just pitches, although it was also about improving the position of some of these sites as well through that sort of, that sort of process as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's all I had on. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that we recognise and we're confident that this will happen through the council, through their development that they've already provided through permissions, but also the fact that families are coming forward direct to the council as well as through discussions we've had, and families are more open to come forward, and I think more will come forward than what have done in the past, because they've been apprehensive in the past, but they're more confident in coming forward, and people are planning on coming forward. They're working out when to come forward and are ready to do that. So we feel confident both through the council's history of evidence that they've provided, of permissions they've granted, but also the attitude of families of coming forward and people feeling encouraged to come forward.
Thank you. Right, that's all I've got on supply, unless anybody else wants to add anything. No, okay. So if we move to question 69, that's about the policy criteria. So we've obviously got some MMs on that. I think criterion F in particular is looking to incorporate some additional guidance, particularly on the design of the traveller sites that perhaps come from the DPD. Can you just explain those for us?
Yes, criteria F has now become G in the modifications. In terms of the specific alterations, point 1, where it talks about the site not being within an international or national planning designation. For the point of clarity, we've added some definitions or some terms that relate to those. I probably say that it does include reference to green belts, which I think was a point made by CPRE in their representations on this issue. Point 3 includes a reference to sites that it would not have any significant impact on local planning designations, and then we've amplified that by saying including those designated in the neighbourhood plan, so that's a sort of consistency point. Point 7 probably in part harks back to discussions we had on Mitten, because so it's consistency, it's any impact on functionally linked land or water, which is a modification we talked about earlier. Point 11, we've talked about a comfortable living environment. So we've added the word living just for clarity there. And towards the bottom, there's reference to the fact that sites with public or privately rented pitches should provide a combination of different size pitches to meet the needs of different households. So it's responding to the needs of the community. Then there's 2 new points at 14 and 15. 14, there should be clear separation between public, e.g. play areas, and private spaces. Layouts should enable safe and easy access around the site for residents. 15 is then on larger sites, 5 or more pitches, a safe children's play area should be provided. And 16, which relates to the travelling show people site, has a final addition at the end of that sentence, which goes, and designed to avoid conflict between vehicles, business use and residential areas. So they're all intended to provide greater certainty to get the right sort of quality of place, if that's the right expression. And, you know, going forward, you know, there's quite a lot of guidance out there, both nationally from, you know, various advisory panels with good examples of how one should approach these sort of traveller sites in this day and age. So the intention is to sort of take those forward in that, I suppose, an enlightened way to deliver the appropriate environment for the people living within those areas.
Okay, thank you. That's the final question on this matter. I don't have anything else unless anybody else has anything to add on matter 7. No? Okay. So that just leaves us to thank everybody for all their contributions today and this week. Just for the council, we will review the action list, but we haven't had a chance yet, so it'll be probably next week, and we'll get back to you on that. So I'm going to adjourn now, and then we'll resume in week 4 when we come back on the 29th of April to consider the policies in matters 15 and 16, and we'll be at Pershore. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. That was a really helpful discussion on the Gypsy and Travellers. Thanks.